Hello everyone! Today I'll be discussing my thoughts on the recently popular shoujo series known as A Sign of Affection. Since I started my channel, I've been catching up on a lot of series that I missed over the years, and I've also started paying attention to new releases. On a whim, I decided to give A Sign of Affection a chance, seeing that it's a new shoujo series that many people really like and has also recently gotten an anime adaptation. While the manga is still ongoing, I would still like to share my thoughts on the series as it seems to differ from many of the opinions I've seen from other fans. In short, I'm enjoying the series, but have noticed many flaws that hide underneath its cozy and fluffy facade. I'd like to discuss those flaws today as I feel they are being largely ignored by fans. Before I discuss the problems I have with this manga, I'd like to talk about what I think works well and the things that made it difficult for me to put it down. A Sign of Affection follows a university student named Yuki and her love interest Itsuomi. Yuki is deaf and uses her phone and sign language to communicate with others. Itsuomi is a mysterious boy who speaks many different languages and travels to other countries often. The two hit it off very quickly and eventually begin dating early on in the manga. The pair are also surrounded by an interesting cast of characters who also deal with their own romantic struggles. The main focus of A Sign of Affection's story is the developing relationship between Yuki and Itsuomi. It was refreshing to read a story with a focus on the relationship itself rather than the build-up to it, as many shoujo and romance manga I've read before never really explore that. While I didn't like Itsuomi at first and thought that he might be taking advantage of Yuki for one reason or another, he grew on me very quickly. At first, Itsuomi is very mysterious and we don't know for sure what's going on inside of him. Most of the interactions we see between him and Yuki are solely romantic, and his development is very slow throughout the manga. Itsuomi isn't a one-dimensional character, as we get glimpses of his goofy side in his interactions with the other male characters specifically. As for Yuki, we can see how her circumstances have affected her development and ability to connect with others. Ultimately, what brings these two together is their desire to connect with people by different means of communication. This is especially true with Itsuomi, which is evident by his statement in Chapter 8 about his desire to have an influence on her, and how her way of being fascinates him. From what we know, he has never met someone like Yuki who is deaf, and because of this, he wants to learn sign language to communicate with her, and enter her world, so to speak. The manga also features beautifully drawn characters that really shine during the romantic scenes. I also love that the mangaka was never afraid to give the characters exaggerated expressions at times, breathing more life into the story. While there is a lot to love about A Sign of Affection, I also think it has many shortcomings. The story is just likable enough to have you rooting for its characters, but falls flat when it comes to setting the groundwork for these characters to grow. In other words, character development is here, but there really isn't a solid foundation for it. Before discussing this further, I would like to mention that in Chapter 31 of the series, Itsuomi mentions how their love seemed to have started backwards, with him and Yuki immediately loving each other instead of having it develop over time. Since the manga isn't finished, there's a possibility that the mangaka is intentionally doing this with the character development as well. Instead of laying the groundwork with character backstories, it will slowly be revealed to us over time, which based on the latest chapter, Chapter 41, this could very well be the case. I would appreciate this from a writer's perspective, since it's not something seen often in fiction, but I think for the most part, having little to no backstory at the beginning of the series will make readers grow bored of it very quickly, ultimately making it difficult for people to get into it. Another issue I have with this series is how Yuki is written. From the perspective of someone who is deaf, I can imagine that it's easy to sympathize with her struggles to open up to others, while it gives those without deafness an understanding of what it's like to deal with that. This is where Yuki shines as a character, however, there's no substance at all behind the deaf representation, which honestly rubs me the wrong way. Not all representation is good representation. The only thing Yuki aspires to be is a good girlfriend to Itsuomi, and well, that's really it. We don't get much insight on anything else in her life, besides brief mentions of her part-time job and family life. Since this series is aimed at young adult women, I don't think it's the best example to set or emulate, as it's important that women have aspirations that go beyond romantic endeavors. It was extremely hard to connect with Yuki for this reason. We don't know anything about what she likes, any hobbies or goals outside of her relationship. She unfortunately feels like a character the reader is meant to project themselves onto, since the primary focus of the series is romantic gestures between her and Itsuomi. As I mentioned, everything and everyone in A Sign of Affection is likable, but I just think it needs so much more. As I watch Itsuomi and Yuki's relationship grow, I want to see Yuki grow as well and become her own person outside of the relationship. Hopefully we see more of her individual growth in the upcoming chapters, as we are seeing a bit with Itsuomi. All of the side characters in this manga are interesting in their own right, from Shin to Emma to Yuki's best friend Rin. They each complement the series as their relationships with one another differ from Yuki and Itsuomi's, which gives readers some much-needed breaks from the oversaturated sweetness and fluff that make up the bulk of the story. The most notorious character from A Sign of Affection is Oshi, a childhood friend of Yuki's. Oshi acts as the rival in love with Itsuomi for Yuki's affection. He is very hot-tempered and also frequently sullen, as he has difficulties expressing how he feels about Yuki. Oshi met Yuki when they were very young, and due to her disability, Oshi was very fascinated by her, leading him to learn sign language himself. Right off the bat, most of his interactions with Yuki seem to perplex her, as he often shows concern for her relationship with Itsuomi. This leaves Yuki seemingly uncomfortable, as she feels very confident in her relationship. I do think it's somewhat selfish on Yuki's part to dismiss Oshi, but she often wonders about why he acts the way he does. I think her feelings for Itsuomi blind her to the fact that Oshi also has feelings for her. What's interesting about both Oshi and Itsuomi is that they both fell in love with Yuki for the same reason. In chapter 17, there's a flashback to the time when Oshi met Yuki, and he thinks about how he would love to learn sign language to enter her world. Sound familiar? The fact that Itsuomi and Oshi have this in common is something I think many fans fail to notice, and dismiss Oshi for being controlling and downright toxic, with some going as far to say that the character is even ableist. In an article from Let's Otaku by J.C. Parker, they explore the idea that much of Oshi's behavior can be explained by his internalized ableism. One of the quote-unquote main red flags brought up in this article is his protectiveness of Yuki. The article claims that Oshi doesn't see Yuki as an independent or complete person, without providing any evidence of this, other than the fact that he's overprotective of her, which doesn't qualify as evidence. Since we know he is in love with her, that would be the only explanation for his behavior, since her relationship with Itsuomi was moving very fast, and that would be the logical reason as to why he was uneasy about it and felt the need to discuss it with her. If Oshi was truly ableist, I don't think he would have learned sign language to communicate with Yuki. He had to take the time to learn so he could communicate with her. If he were truly ableist, he would be dismissive of her disability and probably wouldn't have even considered learning sign language in the first place. And much of his protective behavior towards her is because he loves her and is upset about Itsuomi and is afraid of losing her. Oshi isn't perfect by any means, as his primary struggle is expressing how he feels to Yuki, since he comes across so harsh at times. I understand why some fans dislike the character for that reason, but calling him ableist seems to be a stretch. The article also mentions Oshi being rude to Itsuomi during their interactions, such as telling him that he'll be taking Yuki away from him, which never happens. In fact, it's quite the opposite. During the interactions between Oshi and Itsuomi, both can be interpreted as being rude to one another, with Itsuomi being more playful and passive-aggressive. Because Oshi is more blunt and vocal during these scenes, fans give Itsuomi a pass because he is the quote-unquote picture-perfect male lead and Yuki's love interest. I never saw these interactions as problematic between the two of them, since they have the same goal and they're essentially in each other's way. I always saw these interactions as somewhat humorous. Hell, Itsuomi even considers Oshi his friend later on in the manga, and claims that there's no real reason to hate him at all. The article closes with a segment on Oshi dating other girls in the past, which is completely irrelevant. People can have relationships while still being in love with someone else who might be unavailable. After all, Yuki and Oshi went to different schools until college. It honestly makes his feelings for her and his inability to confess to her more believable. It's because it's more frightening for him to be with her because he truly loves her. Itsuomi's appearance was sudden, and since Oshi has a very forward personality and he's in love, he feels the need to tell Yuki to be careful with Itsuomi. Not once has he ever tried to stop the relationship from happening. He has only stated his feelings, and the one time he did ask Itsuomi to break up with her, he was intoxicated after Itsuomi invited him out to go drinking. Fans of this series don't give any grace to Oshi and unfairly label him as ableist. It really depends on your perspective, but I just don't think this is the case. I'd also like to point out that Oshi fell in love because of her deafness and learned sign language to be with her, which is the same thing Itsuomi is doing, yet fans don't seem to label him as ableist. Why are fans so critical of Oshi and not Itsuomi, when they have the same motivations and goals? Also, the character of Emma has romantic feelings for Itsuomi and can seem clingy and nosy with him, yet she doesn't get nearly the level of hate Oshi does from fans. According to the Center of Disability Rights, ableism can be defined as a set of beliefs or practices that devalue and discriminate against people with physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disabilities, and often rest on the assumption that disabled people need to be fixed in one form or another. Ableism can also be seen when people with disabilities aren't included in events or won't be accommodated, or even when people are exaggeratedly kind to those with disabilities. None of this applies to either Oshi or Itsuomi, as they never devalue Yuki because of her deafness, and neither feel the need to fix her, as they love her for exactly the way she is. Oshi's behavior can be easily explained by his love for Yuki and his age. I mean, he's still a very young adult after all. The label that he is ableist is most likely a misinterpretation by angry fans who see him as an obstacle between Itsuomi and Yuki, and are put off by the fact that Oshi disrupts the emotional comfort the romantic scenes give to the readers. If anything, Oshi makes this series a lot more interesting, and it's a shame that fans so vehemently despise him. Oshi is a character worthy of criticism, but not hatred. A Sign of Affection is a shoujo manga that excels at romance, but not much else. I will still be checking out the upcoming chapters as I feel the series has a lot of potential going forward. Yuki and the rest of the characters are ones that I can easily get behind, which is why I hope going forward that we can get more details about them beyond their romantic lives. I still have yet to check out the anime, which looks absolutely gorgeous. Despite its problems, I still recommend this manga to shoujo fans. However, don't go into it with high expectations, as this manga is more of a feel-good experience with little to no depth. Thank you for watching the video. I know I had a few hot takes in this one. What do you think of A Sign of Affection? Do you like or dislike it? Do you agree or disagree with my thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe for more content like this. See ya!